Alfred Nobel was a strange man who created some truly special things. This Swedish chemist, engineer, and inventor changed the world for the future with his invention of dynamite, but he's perhaps more famous today for creating the Nobel Prize. So who was this curious man and how did he have such an impact on history? Well, let's take a look at the biography of Alfred Nobel. Alfred Nobel was born in Stockholm, Sweden in 1833. He was the son of a well-known engineer and inventor, Emmanuel Nobel. His father had made a name for himself by designing and building bridges. The family were quite well off financially, which meant that Alfred and his 4 siblings could attend university if they wished. Tragically, however, Alfred's mother and 3 of his siblings would pass away when he was still quite young, leaving him, his father, and his younger brother Ludwig rather alone in the world. Alfred was a bright child, and he showed great promise. At age 17, he moved to Paris to study chemistry, but soon after he would move to the United States to work in his father's business. In America, Alfred learned about the process of making nitroglycerin, which is a very unstable explosive substance that's commonly used in mining. Though the business didn't really go anywhere, Alfred continued to experiment with nitroglycerin in his own time. Over several years, he tried to find ways to stabilize it so it could be used safely. And in 1866, he finally invented dynamite. Dynamite made Alfred very rich, and as he had no children, he decided to use his money to set up a foundation to award prizes for those who had made outstanding contributions to humanity in various fields. The foundation would eventually become the Nobel Foundation, which is still around today, and the awards given out by the foundation are now known simply as the Nobel Prizes. But despite being remembered today for his philanthropy, Alfred Nobel was actually a rather strange and private man. So, what was the life of Alfred Nobel like? Well, let's take a look at his biography to find out. Alfred Nobel was never married, and he had no children, but he was a huge animal rights activist. Throughout his life, he owned many pets and reportedly would never eat meat because he felt it was wrong to kill animals just for food. He also believed that animals should not be used for scientific testing, which was common practice at the time, and he funded several animal rights organizations. Although he was quite reclusive and rarely socialized, he was known to regularly attend performances at the Royal Swedish Opera and would buy boxes just so he could put birds back into their cages during the intermission. Alfred Nobel was extremely private, but we do know that he suffered from depression throughout his life. When he was just 23 years old, he attempted to take his own life. He kept detailed journals throughout his life, and in them, he often wrote of his sadness and loneliness. While living in Paris, he began having affairs with prostitutes, and to try and avoid the negative attention this may bring, he kept their trysts in cheap hotels outside of the city. Sadly, one day, one of the women died in his arms after having an overdose. Distraught, he then returned to Stockholm, where he began experiencing panic attacks. It was at this point that he started to consider ending his life. In 1865, while walking along the banks of the Thames, he decided to end it all by throwing himself into the water. But before he did, he received a letter from his father asking him to return home. Perhaps feeling that he let his father down or believing that he was a burden to him, Alfred then decided to go through with his plans once his father was gone. After receiving this news, Alfred spent the next few years attempting to take his own life on several occasions. Eventually, he managed to convince himself that death was not the answer, and he threw himself into his work. He started to throw himself into his work, and this led to him inventing dynamite in 1867. It wasn't long before governments around the world wanted to get their hands on dynamite and the companies that produced it. Alfred saw how much power this gave him, and he became incredibly paranoid. For the rest of his life, he was convinced that people were out to get him and that they would do anything to steal his secret recipes. In fact, someone did try to blackmail him over a chemical formula, but he refused to give in. He instead took these claims to the police and they uncovered a plot to rob one of his factories. It turned out that the person who had tried to blackmail him was actually innocent, and he was later released. However, the damage was done, and Alfred's paranoia only got worse. He kept his personal quarters very simple and never allowed anyone except for his servants to enter. He always carried a revolver with him and would sometimes fire shots just to hear the noise. He was also convinced that people were poisoning him, and he would often spend days on end locked in his bedroom eating nothing but bread and drinking only boiled water. Of course, there were times when he needed to leave his home, but he hated doing this as he suffered greatly from agoraphobia. When he traveled, he would have panic attacks and he would need to be carried into buildings. To help combat this, he built a series of underground tunnels beneath his estate that connected various rooms in his home to shops and other buildings on the property. He even had a tunnel built to the local train station so he wouldn't ever have to board a train in public. Alfred Nobel was often seen as an eccentric billionaire, but he was also a genius inventor. He was responsible for several important inventions, including dynamite, blasting caps, detonators, and gelignite. Most of these inventions were in the field of explosives, and it's no wonder why he was so secretive. If his competitors could get hold of his formulas, they would make a fortune. Tragically, Alfred Nobel passed away in 1896 after suffering a stroke. He had no close family members to leave his estate to, so he left it to the Nobel Foundation, which he had set up to oversee the prizes in his name. Today, the Nobel Prizes are awarded annually to those who have made great contributions to physics, chemistry, medicine, literature, and peace. A sixth prize has recently been added, which is awarded to those who have made the greatest economic discoveries. As you can see from this biography, Alfred Nobel was a man of many contradictions. He was a genius inventor who was also paranoid and depressed. He was an animal rights activist who regularly visited prostitutes. He was also a very private person who ended up becoming famous for setting up the Nobel Prizes. Whatever your thoughts on Alfred, one thing is for sure, he was a true original. Now it's time to make your voice heard. What did you think of Alfred Nobel's life? Which part of his biography surprised you the most? As always, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, thank you very much for watching.